It was supposed to be a quiet stopover. After a long drive through a remote coastal region, Mark Dalton, a 46-year-old insurance adjuster, found himself lost in the fog. His GPS had gone silent miles ago, and his phone had no signal. Tired, hungry, and a little uneasy, he spotted a flickering sign through the mist that read, "Sea Rest Pension." It looked old, but not abandoned. Weathered wood, rusted lanterns, and thick ivy crawling up the sides. He turned into the narrow gravel driveway, thinking it was better than sleeping in the car. Inside, the front desk was dimly lit by a single yellow bulb. A woman in her 60s, pale and sharp-eyed, stood behind the counter. Her name tag read, Irene. "Room for one?" she asked, before he could say a word. Mark forced a smile. Just for the night. Her stare lingered too long before handing him a tarnished brass key. "Room 6, quietest one we have." Her voice had no warmth. No one else seemed to be staying there, but Mark, exhausted, told himself not to be paranoid. Room 6 was at the end of a narrow hallway. The carpet smelled of mildew, and the air was dense, like it hadn't been aired out in years. The room itself was plain. A bed, a small writing desk, a dresser, and a window overlooking a patch of woods. There was a dusty painting above the bed, an old ship tossed in stormy seas. Something about the way the ship was tilted felt unnatural. That night, Mark lay in bed, the sound of wind scraping the windows. Just as he started to drift off, he heard a distinct click, like someone opening his door. He shot up, heart racing. "Hello?" he called. No answer. He crept to the door. It was locked. He checked it twice. Maybe he dreamed it. Maybe it was just nerves. But then he noticed something. The dresser drawer was open. He hadn't touched it. Trying to stay calm, Mark closed the drawer and double-checked the window. Locked. Still, he felt eyes on him, like someone was watching through the painting itself. Laughing at his own anxiety, he turned the frame over, hoping to find a signature or date. There was none, but carved into the wooden backing in jagged letters were the words, "He never left." He sat on the bed, now completely awake. Who was he? Was it some prank? A leftover message from a guest? His instinct told him to leave, but the fog outside was so thick now he could barely see the porch. Plus, he felt oddly tired, as if something heavy pressed on his chest. A dreamless sleep took him moments later. Mark awoke abruptly to the sound of scratching. Not from outside, but inside the room. It was faint, then clearer, slow, deliberate, as if someone was carving into the wall. He fumbled for the lamp. Nothing. The power was out. He grabbed his phone. It was dead, pitch black. He stood still, listening. The scratching was now behind the dresser. Against every logical instinct, he moved it. What he found was more than unsettling. Scratches in the wall, deep grooves forming names, dozens of them. The last one was still unfinished. Ma. He stumbled back, horrified. His breath caught in his throat. Someone, or something, had started writing his name. He yanked the door open and rushed into the hallway. It was darker than before and silent. The wallpaper seemed to move subtly, like something beneath it was breathing. Doors on either side were closed tight, though he swore he saw shadows moving beneath some of them. At the end of the hall stood Irene, still, watching, her hands clasped. Room 6 doesn't like to let go, she whispered, her eyes reflecting no light. You should have asked for room 4. Mark backed away slowly, heart thumping. You need help, he said, his voice shaking. You all need help. She smiled. So did the others. Mark ran to the front door. It wouldn't open. He slammed it, pulled it, kicked it. Nothing. The window beside it showed nothing but blackness, as if the outside world had vanished. He turned to see the lobby shift in shape. Walls bending, ceiling stretching. The floor creaked under invisible steps. He rushed back to the room, grabbed his bag, and tried to find another exit. A back door, a fire escape, anything. But the halls no longer made sense. Room numbers repeated. Turns led back to where he started. It was as if the building was reshaping itself around him, like a maze that didn't want him to leave. His breathing grew shallow. Every sound was amplified. Footsteps behind him, whispers in the walls, soft moaning from unseen mouths. The names on the walls followed him, each room marked like a gravestone. He passed room 6 again. Its door was open now. Lights flickered inside. Something was sitting on the bed. He paused, frozen. It was himself, or something that looked exactly like him, smiling. You should rest, it said calmly. You're already here. Mark turned and ran blindly, the building stretching and narrowing. His body screamed for escape, but he felt himself slowing, like the air was thicker. The pension was absorbing him. Finally, a door marked boiler room caught his eye. He burst through it, slamming it shut behind him. The room was hot, humid, filled with rusted pipes and an overwhelming stench of decay. In the corner were old suitcases, shoes, a cracked pair of glasses. He recognized the briefcase. It was his, but aged, mold-covered. He opened it. Inside were his clothes, papers, a photo of him and his daughter, faded beyond recognition. How? He whispered. A noise behind him made him spin around. The Irene-like woman was there, but her face was wrong now, longer, hollow. You've always been here, she said. Some guests just take longer to realize. Mark screamed and swung a rusted pipe. It passed through her like smoke. She didn't move, just stared. No one ever checks out, she hissed, and the room began to shrink. Pipes groaned, walls twisted, heat blazed. Mark pushed past her and found a ladder. He climbed. He emerged outside, but not in the same world. The pension behind him was no longer solid. Its walls flickered like candlelight. He was standing in thick fog. The road was gone. In its place, a row of others stood, silent figures watching him, people who never left. The next morning, a delivery driver reported a strange, crumbling building off the coast road, a place no one had seen in years. When authorities arrived, they found a mouldy, collapsed structure. Inside, among the debris, was a journal belonging to a man named Mark Dalton. The last entry read, "If you find this, don't check in. Room 6 remembers your name. To this day, Sea Rest Pension has no record. It appears on no map. But sometimes, on foggy nights, travelers see its light flickering through the mist, just for a second, and someone always seems to answer the door before they even knock." The rain was merciless the night Abigail Collins' car broke down. She had taken an unplanned detour through the northern hills of Devonshire, missing the highway turn after a long day of driving. Her GPS was frozen, and the only light she saw for miles came from a weathered building nestled among skeletal trees. It wasn't on any map. The faded wooden sign outside read Ledger Pines Guest House. Since 1893, she didn't think twice. Cold, drenched, and running on 1% phone battery, Abigail climbed the porch stairs and rang the bell. The door opened a moment later, but not because someone answered it. It creaked inward on its own, as if pulled by an unseen force. "Hello?" she called out cautiously. No reply. A narrow hallway stretched ahead, lined with old floral wallpaper and lit by a lone swaying light bulb. A tall man emerged from a side room. He wore a worn waistcoat, gloves, and a strange half smile that didn't quite reach his pale blue eyes. "Welcome," he rasped. "I'm Mr. Ellery, the caretaker." He didn't ask her name. He simply gestured to the desk beside him. "Please, sign the ledger." The guest book looked ancient, bound in cracked leather, its pages yellowed and curling at the edges. She hesitated, but he nudged it closer. Abigail signed her name, noticing that the previous entry, dated 1957, looked smudged, like it had been written in ash. Without another word, Mr. Ellery handed her a brass key. "Room 3, no locks. We don't use them." Room 3 was cold and unnervingly bare. A metal-framed bed, a desk with no drawers, and a crooked mirror nailed to the wall. Her phone wouldn't charge. The outlet sparked and hissed before going dead. She collapsed onto the bed, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Somewhere deep into the night, she heard it. A low, dragging sound, not footsteps. Something heavier, slower, like skin being pulled across wood. Abigail sat up, her breath caught in her throat. The hallway light beneath her door flickered, and then a whisper seeped through the floorboards. Another name. Abigail opened the door cautiously. The hallway was empty, but a few steps down, the guest ledger lay wide open on the floor. She picked it up. Her signature had begun to blur, as if freshly soaked. And beneath her name, a second Abigail Collins had appeared. Slightly darker ink, different handwriting. Back in room 3, she shut the door and backed away. The mirror vibrated softly, emitting a high-pitched hum. She looked into it and froze. Her reflection didn't mimic her movement. The reflection stared back blankly, then began to smile. Abigail stepped to the side, but the image remained centered. Slowly, the reflection raised its arm and pointed behind her. She turned slowly. Carved into the wallpaper behind her, in deep, uneven slashes, were the words, "No one leaves without a name." The doorknob spun freely when she tried it, locked, but not by any conventional means. It felt like the entire room was holding her in. She screamed and pounded on the walls. No response. The mirror's hum grew louder. The reflection mouthed something she couldn't hear, then whispered aloud, "Replace or remain." Terrified, Abigail collapsed onto the mattress. It let out a sickening squish, not a creak. Her hands touched something wet underneath. When she lifted the blanket, her breath left her. Dozens of torn-out ledger pages were stuffed beneath the bed, each marked with a different name, violently crossed out. And beneath them, a body-shaped indentation in the mattress. Fresh, still warm. She didn't sleep again. All night, the walls pulsed with faint whispers, like the house was breathing. In the morning, she opened her door. The hallway had changed. There were now mirrors lining every wall, each reflecting a version of her. Some bruised, some older, some with eyes missing. Mr. Ellery was waiting by the stairs. She ran to him. "I want to leave," she demanded. He looked at her, expression flat. "You've already written yourself in. The ledger holds what it claims." She pushed past him and flung open the front door, but instead of the forest or her car, there was only another hallway, same wallpaper, same hanging bulb, and a new ledger waiting on a pedestal. Panicked, she turned back. Mr. Ellery was gone. She opened the ledger again. Her name had appeared 4 more times. Desperate, Abigail tore out the page and set it ablaze in a small trash bin from room 3. The flames roared, and she thought just maybe it worked. But the next morning, the ledger was intact again. Her name now appeared 7 times, each signature slightly more twisted than the last. She ran to the other rooms. Room 5 had a child huddled in the corner. When Abigail asked her name, the girl replied, "I don't remember. The book took it." On the 4th night, Abigail looked into the mirror again. Her reflection now had hollow eyes, her mouth sewn shut. But it moved, pointing to the page on the desk. She saw one final entry beneath her name, this time in deep red ink. Available. As she screamed and clawed at the walls, the light in room 3 dimmed for good. The ledger closed itself and waited for the next guest to sign. I had never been the type to book anything last minute, but after a grueling business trip ended earlier than expected, I wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere remote to spend a night before heading home. A quick search led me to the Whitley boarding house, tucked away on the outskirts of a near-forgotten town in northern Vermont. The photos showed an old Victorian house, with a cozy front porch and soft, warm lighting inside. It looked charming, nostalgic even. The kind of place your grandparents might have run in the 50s. When I arrived, the road was damp from recent rain, and a low fog hugged the treetops. The place looked older in person, much older. The white paint on the exterior had long since faded into a dull grey, and ivy had claimed a good portion of the right side. Still, there was something oddly comforting about it, like it had been waiting. As I stepped onto the creaking porch, I felt that brief chill you get before something touches you in your sleep. An elderly woman greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome, Mr. Holloway," she said, though I was certain I hadn't given my name. "Room 4 is ready. You'll be our only guest tonight." That should have been the first red flag. The lobby was quaint, filled with antique furniture and the musty scent of old wood and lavender polish. A large guest book sat open on a pedestal desk. Its pages were yellowed, the ink fading. As I passed it, I glanced down at the entries. The dates jumped from the 1980s to... My heart skipped my name, freshly written, in handwriting I didn't recognize. I looked up quickly. The old woman was already halfway up the stairs, moving with an unnatural grace for someone her age. I followed, my breath catching in my throat. My footsteps echoed too loudly on the wood. Room 4 was neat, though dated, wallpaper with floral patterns, a bed with a brass headboard, and a small mirror on the far wall. I tried to dismiss the growing unease, gnawing at my gut, blaming it on exhaustion. But as I set my bag down, the light in the hallway flickered. From the mirror, I thought I saw movement, a shape, dark and tall, slipping past the doorway. I rushed to check, but the hallway was empty. just the occasional moan of the old floorboards and the distant ticking of a grandfather clock downstairs. Trying to settle in, I pulled the covers back and saw something odd carved into the wooden headboard. A name, G. Whitley. It rang a bell. I vaguely recalled reading about a Gerald Whitley years ago in a thread about missing persons. He had vanished while travelling through Vermont. My stomach turned. That name was dated 1984 in the guest book downstairs. I tried to sleep, but the room didn't want me to. The creaks weren't random. They formed patterns, footsteps that paced just outside my door, then stopped, and then resumed. But inside the room, my eyes snapped open more than once to the sight of the mirror showing things that weren't there. Reflections of people who hadn't been alive in decades. One of them, a woman in a blue dress with hollow eyes, stood behind me in the reflection, unmoving. When I turned, she was gone. At exactly 3:07 a.m., a knocking began on the wall behind the bed, not on the door, the wall. Steady, rhythmic, then whispers followed. Dry, crackling voices reciting names, over and over, and mine was the last one they spoke. I packed up to leave, heart pounding. I didn't care that it was still dark, or that I hadn't slept, I just wanted out. But when I opened the door to the hallway, the house had changed. The corridor now stretched longer than it had any right to. The wallpaper was torn and burned in places, and every door was open, each one revealing identical rooms with occupants. Pale, unmoving occupants sitting up in bed, heads tilted towards me. I ran, down the hall, down the stairs, but the lobby was no longer quaint. The guest book was now sealed shut, its pages burned. The old woman stood in front of the main door, smiling fully now, her teeth far too long and far too many. "You signed," she whispered. "You belong." I lunged for the door anyway, but it didn't open. It wasn't even a door anymore, just a wooden wall where the entrance had been. I turned to find the house closing in. The lights dimmed, the air thickened, and I couldn't breathe. Somewhere above me, I heard footsteps descending the stairs, but when I looked, no one was there. Just the shadow of something tall dragging something heavier than it should have. I backed away, stumbling, trying to remember if I'd ever seen another car in the lot when I arrived. I found myself drawn back toward the guest book as if pulled by invisible threads. My hands trembled as I reached out to touch it. The book snapped open violently, the pages flapping until it stopped on a blank page. A quill appeared on the desk, ink dripping from its tip. My name began to rewrite itself in front of my eyes, over and over, each time more erratic and twisted. The sound of whispers grew louder. Faces began to materialize in the walls, mouthing screams I couldn't hear. I backed away, but the floorboards groaned and shifted like a living thing beneath my feet. I bolted down what I thought was the hallway again, but it was no longer linear. Rooms bled into each other. Some had no floors, some had no ceilings. One was filled entirely with mirrors, each showing a version of me that looked increasingly dead. My breath was ragged, my mind barely holding together. And then I found a room unlike the others. It was cold, silent and empty, except for a rocking chair in the center. On it sat the old woman, but her skin now translucent, stretched tight over a skull that grinned too wide. "This is where they all end up," she whispered, rocking. "Once the house knows your name." My voice cracked as I begged her to let me go, promising anything. She didn't answer. Instead, she pointed at the far wall where a new mirror hung. As I turned, I saw my reflection smiling back, calm, accepting, but I wasn't smiling. I screamed, but no sound came out. The mirror's surface rippled and pulled me in. Darkness swallowed everything. The last thing I remember was the sensation of being rewritten. My name, my memories, replaced. Now I wait in room 4, like all the others, for someone else to sign the book.